Infidelity is not always the end. When betrayal opens new doors. He came home earlier than expected. She was standing in the kitchen, trying to hide the trembling in her hands. In the closet lay someone else's shirt. Logan's cologne still lingered in the air. Michael appeared in the doorway of the kitchen. His cold gaze settled on Elizabeth. At that very moment, her phone rang. The name on the screen was someone he didn't even suspect. Elizabeth had always been a woman who could keep everything under control. At 34, her life seemed perfect. A luxurious suburban house, beautiful photos on social media, and a husband everyone envied. Michael was perfect for everyone else. To her, he had become distant and indifferent. Work, calls, meetings. His life revolved around success, and Elizabeth's role in it had dwindled to a few formal, "How was your day?" exchanges before bed. So when Logan came into her life, everything changed. Logan saw something in her beyond just the wife of a successful lawyer. He was vibrant, passionate, and unpredictable. Their first conversation started casually, but ended in a way Elizabeth could never have imagined. "You look like someone who's searching for more than just coffee," he said as she stood in line. Those words etched themselves into her memory. Now, her life had become a delicate dance between truth and lies. She hid behind meetings with friends and trips to the store. Every call from Logan was a rush of adrenaline. But she didn't know that Michael had long noticed the changes. His habit of reading between the lines and analyzing behavior, skills that made him an outstanding lawyer, had become his greatest weapon. He didn't show that he suspected her. Instead, he watched. One day, when Elizabeth came home from a meeting with Logan, Michael was there to greet her. "You've changed," he said with a barely noticeable smile. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to hide her nervousness. "Just an observation," he replied and walked into his study. The next morning, Elizabeth woke up and noticed that her phone had been left unlocked. She realized Michael could have seen everything: messages, photos, even the hotel address. But the worst came that evening. Michael came home early. Her heart started racing as she realized she had forgotten to hide Logan's shirt, which lay on a chair in the bedroom. The scent of his cologne was still in the air. She rushed to the room, but it was too late. Michael was already standing in the doorway. "Is there something you'd like to tell me?" he asked, his voice quiet but incredibly tense. At that moment, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. It was Logan. Michael extended his hand, silently demanding the phone. Michael stood before Elizabeth, his hand outstretched. His gaze was cold, and she understood. Refusal was not an option. Her hands trembled as she handed him the phone. He looked at the screen and saw Logan's name. His lips curved into a faint smile. Michael pressed the answer button. "This is Michael," he said calmly, his voice devoid of anger or surprise. On the other end of the line, there was silence. Then Logan spoke. Hi. Can I speak to Elizabeth?" Michael took a step closer to his wife. His eyes locked onto her face, which had turned as pale as chalk. "You know, Logan, she's a bit busy right now, but it seems we have something important to discuss. Maybe you can explain why there's a shirt in my bedroom and why your name is showing up on my wife's phone at this hour." Logan tried to say something, but Michael interrupted. "Don't bother denying it. I'll be coming to see you, and we'll talk face to face." Michael hung up the call without waiting for a response. He tossed the phone onto the table and turned back to Elizabeth. "Now I understand why you've seemed so lively lately," he said with irony. Elizabeth tried to speak. "Michael, it's not what you think." But he stopped her with a gesture. "Don't bother. I'm a lawyer, remember? I can smell a lie a mile away. But now everything will fall into place. We'll talk after I've had my meeting with your friend." Michael grabbed his car keys and headed for the door. Elizabeth remained standing in the room, unsure of what to do. She understood that if Michael met Logan, the consequences could be disastrous. In a panic, she called Logan. "You need to disappear. Michael is coming to you." "What do you mean?" Logan asked. "Just please, don't be home. I'll deal with this, but you can't see him." Logan fell silent. Then he replied, "All right, but you have to choose. I'm not going to hide forever." Elizabeth realized the situation was spiraling out of control. She didn't even notice how forcefully Michael shut the door or how the car screeched as it sped away. Her mind was consumed by a single thought. What is he going to do? Michael drove to the address he quickly found on Elizabeth's phone. His heartbeat was steady, almost mechanical, like that of a professional preparing for an important court hearing. But inside, he was torn to pieces. The betrayal didn't just wound him. It called everything he believed in into question. Himself, their marriage, even her. When Michael pulled up to the house, the lights in the windows were still on. He stopped in front of the door, waited a few seconds, then knocked sharply. Logan opened the door. A tall, confident man with an open smile that instantly vanished when he saw Michael. "You must be Logan," Michael said calmly, though his gaze burned. "Yes. And you must be Michael," Logan replied, trying to keep his composure. Michael entered the house uninvited. He glanced around the room. A stylish interior that didn't quite match the life of someone who played by the rules. On the table was an open bottle of whiskey, with 2 glasses nearby. "Don't pretend. I already know who you are and what you're doing with my wife," Michael said, sitting in an armchair. "It's not exactly what you think," Logan began, but Michael stopped him with a raised finger. "You know, I like to say that the truth is always in the details. So let me clarify. Are you the man who left his shirt in my bedroom?" Logan sighed, realizing there was no point in denying it. "Yes, that's me. But let me ask you, when was the last time you truly listened to your wife? When was the last time you noticed what she was missing? This isn't just about me, Michael. It's about you, too." Those words struck Michael deeper than he expected, but he didn't allow himself to falter. "You really think you can lecture me about relationships while you're the one wrecking someone else's marriage? You're just an excuse, Logan. And now I'll show you how these stories end." Michael pulled out his phone and called someone. "Yes, it's me. I've got a situation that needs handling. A man named Logan Drake. Check all his connections, financial records, everything. Find out where he bins." Logan began to grow nervous, but tried to maintain his composure. "What are you doing? Is this your method?" "I'm a lawyer, Logan. I don't play with fists. I destroy completely. You're just a piece on the board, but I'll never let you affect my life. And you'll live with the consequences of this for the rest of your days." Logan stayed silent. His usual confidence started to melt away. Michael stood up and headed for the door. "Now choose. Disappear from her life, or I'll find a way to ruin yours." The door slammed shut, leaving Logan standing in the middle of the room, realizing he had just stepped into a game he was utterly unprepared for. Michael left Logan's house, barely containing the storm of emotions within. But for Logan, this was only the beginning. He knew that letting Michael win meant losing everything he had built with Elizabeth. Late at night, while Michael was working in his office, Elizabeth received a message. Her heart sank as the familiar name appeared on her phone screen. Logan, we need to meet. This is much more serious than you think. I won't back down. Elizabeth didn't respond immediately. She sat in the darkened living room, holding her phone, her thoughts torn between fear and desire. Finally, she wrote, "This is too dangerous. Michael knows everything. He won't leave you alone." A few minutes later, Logan replied, "I'm ready to take the risk. I need you, Liz. I won't let him have you. Tomorrow morning, I'll wait for you at the place where it all began. If you come, we'll run away together. If you don't, I still won't back down." The next morning, Elizabeth left the house, telling Michael she was meeting a friend. His gaze was so cold that she felt like a little child caught in a lie. "You'll be back on time, won't you?" he said, with an unmistakable threat in his voice. "Of course, just a couple of hours," she replied, trying to appear casual. Elizabeth headed to the cafe where she had first met Logan. He was sitting at the same table, looking so calm it only heightened her anxiety. "Liz," he stood up and hugged her. "I know how this sounds, but we can do this. We can leave it all behind. I have a plan." "You don't understand," she replied, sitting across from him. "Michael will never stop. He'll destroy your life. He'll destroy both of us." Logan leaned closer, his voice almost a whisper. "I'm not going to stop either. He may be powerful in his world, but I have my own leverage. I've gathered enough information to make him back off." Elizabeth flinched. "What do you mean?" Logan looked her straight in the eyes. "I know more than he thinks. I have evidence that could ruin his reputation, his career. If he pushes too hard, I won't stay silent." Elizabeth didn't know what to say. She found herself in a situation where every choice seemed wrong. Running away with Logan meant destroying everything she had built with Michael. But staying meant losing what she had found in Logan. "Give me some time," she said. "We don't have time, Liz," he replied. "It's now or never." Elizabeth stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. Her hands trembled as she packed, just the essentials. A small suitcase, hidden under the bed, had been ready for days. Her decision felt final. She would leave. The evening was quiet. Michael was in his office, deeply engrossed in work. She approached him for what felt like a last glance into his eyes. His gaze seemed distant, but that was nothing new. "I'm going to see Emmy." She asked for help with some documents, Elizabeth said, avoiding his eyes. Michael only nodded, not even looking up from his laptop. Half an hour later, she was already in the car with Logan. He looked calm, even satisfied. "You made the right choice, Liz," he said, squeezing her hand. But Elizabeth's heart was uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was going too smoothly. "Where are we going?" she asked, trying to collect her thoughts. "We have a few hours head start. I rented a house outside the city. We'll be safe there," Logan replied, keeping his eyes on the road. They drove in silence. Elizabeth stared out the window, watching the dark landscapes pass by. But her anxiety grew. Something felt wrong. When they arrived, the house looked perfect, small, cozy, hidden in the woods. Logan helped her bring in the bags and led her inside. "No one will find us here," he said, hugging her from behind. Elizabeth finally allowed herself to relax, though thoughts of Michael still gnawed at her mind. She knew he wouldn't let this go. The night passed quietly, but in the morning, everything changed. When Elizabeth woke up, Logan was gone. She stepped out of the room and noticed the front door was open. Her heart tightened as she saw her phone on the table, turned off, though she had left it charging. A sense of unease turned into fear when she saw that her suitcase had been opened and her belongings were scattered across the floor. "Logan," she called out, but only silence replied. Suddenly, a voice spoke behind her. "Well, Elizabeth, you made your choice. Now the game begins." She turned around and saw Michael. He stood in the doorway, calm and confident, holding a small suitcase in his hand. "Michael, how did you find me?" He just smiled. "You know I always keep everything under control, even you. And your Logan turned out to be quite an interesting character. Did you really think he was who he claimed to be?" Elizabeth turned again, searching for Logan, but he was nowhere to be seen. "You'd better take a look at his laptop. Logan likes to play on multiple fronts at once. For example, your photos, Liz, are already in his personal collection. And do you know what's worse? He works for my competitors." Elizabeth felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. "What did you do to him?" she asked. "Nothing he didn't deserve," Michael replied. "Now, we have time to discuss how you plan to explain this, but I'll give you a choice. You can stay and fix everything, or I'll destroy not just your life, but his as well." Elizabeth felt her heart tighten with fear and resentment. Michael stood before her, confident in his power and control. She realized her freedom now depended on her ability to resist his manipulations. "You can't hold me hostage, Michael," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. Michael smiled, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Oh, but I already am, Liz. And you know you can't escape without consequences." Elizabeth felt her anger growing. She knew she had to act cautiously to avoid provoking him further. "Fine," she said, lowering her eyes. "I'll stay, but I need time to think everything over." Michael nodded, satisfied with her submission. "A wise decision. I'll give you as much time as you need." Over the next few days, Elizabeth played the role of the obedient wife, following all his demands. She knew Michael was watching her every move, so she acted carefully, hiding her true intentions. One evening, when Michael was busy in his office, Elizabeth seized the moment to call Logan. "Logan, I need your help," she whispered, holding the phone to her ear. "What's going on, Liz?" Logan asked, his voice filled with concern. "Michael is keeping me under control. I can't escape without your help. I'll find a way to get you out of there. Hang tight." The next day, Logan sent her a message with instructions. Elizabeth was to prepare for the escape when Michael was at work. She packed the essentials and waited for the right moment. However, just as she was ready to leave the house, the door suddenly opened and Michael stood in the doorway. His face was filled with rage. "Did you really think you could fool me?" he growled, stepping toward her. Elizabeth backed away, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. "Michael, you don't understand anything, Liz. I'm always one step ahead, and now you'll pay for your betrayal." He grabbed her hand, dragging her back into the house. Elizabeth felt her hopes for freedom crumbling. She realized Michael would stop at nothing to maintain control over her. The next day, Elizabeth woke up early. Michael was calm and even unusually pleasant, which only heightened her unease. She spent the morning acting as though nothing had happened. However, her thoughts were focused on only one thing: the escape plan she had discussed with Logan. He was supposed to wait for her at a gas station outside the city, where they would leave everything behind and start a new life together. That evening, when Michael left for a meeting with a client, Elizabeth quickly gathered her things and left the house. Her heart was racing as if it were about to burst out of her chest. She knew time was short and that Michael likely suspected her. When she arrived at the gas station, Logan was already waiting for her. His car was parked in the shadows, and he stood leaning against the door, smiling. "I knew you'd come," he said, opening the passenger door for her. Elizabeth got into the car, feeling relieved. She believed she had finally left all her problems behind. But after driving a few miles, she noticed that Logan seemed too calm. "Logan, why aren't you asking how I managed to escape?" she asked, trying to understand what was happening. He only smiled. "You think this was your plan, Liz? This was part of my game from the beginning." Elizabeth froze. "What do you mean?" "Michael and I made a deal. He knew you would come to me. He knew you'd try to run. And he let you do it so you'd show what you're capable of." "That's not true," Elizabeth whispered, her voice betraying her fear. "Oh, it's true. I got my share for helping him. Michael knows everything now. And you're going back to him." She realized she was trapped. A sense of betrayal pierced her to the core. Logan, whom she had considered her savior, turned out to be an even greater threat than Michael. When they returned to the house, Michael was already waiting for them. He sat in an armchair in the living room, looking pleased. "I hope you've learned your lesson, Liz," he said, sipping whiskey. "No one plays games with me, not even you." Elizabeth felt anger and despair swelling inside her. She realized her life was now completely under Michael's control. Elizabeth stood in the living room, feeling her heart fill with rage. She looked at Michael, who appeared triumphant, and Logan, who stood nearby as if this had been his plan all along. Her trust had been betrayed by both men, and it shattered the last remnants of her fear. "Do you really think I'll just accept this?" she said, staring directly at Michael. Her voice was cold and firm. Michael smiled. "You don't have a choice, Liz. You've always played by my rules, even if you didn't realize it. And now, you'll go back to your normal life." "Your rules," she said, her voice rising. "You've controlled me for years, but no more." Logan, trying to diffuse the tension, stepped forward. "Liz, it's not what you think." "Shut up," she yelled, stopping him in his tracks. Over the next few days, Elizabeth began playing a new role, that of a submissive and broken wife. She followed all of Michael's demands, creating the illusion of reconciliation. At the same time, she carefully studied his habits, daily routines, financial documents, and contacts. One evening, while Michael was in the shower, she snuck into his office. There, she found what she was looking for: hidden emails, financial reports hinting at illegal deals, and a list of clients clearly interested in shady schemes. "There's his weakness," she thought, copying the documents onto a flash drive. Her next target was Logan. She knew his loyalty was merely a facade and decided to use it against him. She called him late at night while Michael was occupied. "Do you think he'll leave you alone, Logan?" she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Michael is using you just like he's using me. And once you're no longer useful to him, you'll be next." "What are you suggesting?" Logan asked, not hiding his concern. "Help me. Together, we can destroy his empire. I have evidence that could ruin his reputation, but I can't do it alone." Elizabeth and Logan began to act. Carefully, they passed copies of the documents to journalists and Michael's competitors. Elizabeth used her knowledge of his work to sow chaos in his business. One morning, Michael received a call from his partner. "Michael, we have a problem. Someone leaked information about our deals. The press already knows." Michael rushed to Elizabeth, but she met him with a cold smile. "What's the matter, Michael? Seems like your rules don't work anymore." His anger was uncontrollable, but she knew that this time he was powerless. Michael was furious, but his mind remained cold and calculated as always. He knew that panic was a weakness he couldn't afford. After gathering the main information about the leak, he realized that only one person could have dealt such a blow. That evening, he returned home. At the door, he was met by Elizabeth. She looked calm, even satisfied. "How was your day, dear?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Michael smiled, but the smile was just a mask. "Honestly, wonderful. Work always keeps me in shape." He decided to play the long game. Michael began watching Elizabeth's every move, studying her habits, calls, and messages. He installed hidden cameras in the house and tapped her phone. Within a few days, he managed to trace Logan's connection. Now, he had a plan. Michael decided to strike them both simultaneously, but he needed the perfect moment, when they would be most vulnerable. Michael arranged a dinner, which would serve as the ideal setting for his strike. He invited Elizabeth to a restaurant, saying he wanted to discuss their future. She was suspicious but agreed. At the same time, Michael sent a message to Logan through an intermediary, pretending it was from Elizabeth. "Meet me at the restaurant. This will be important for both of us." When Elizabeth arrived at the restaurant, Michael was already waiting at the table. He looked relaxed, even cheerful. "Sit down, darling. We need to talk." She sat down, trying to stay calm. "What do you want to talk about, Michael?" "About how we can rebuild our marriage," he replied, pouring her a glass of wine. Suddenly, the restaurant door opened, and Logan walked in. He looked surprised to see Michael and Elizabeth at the same table. "What is this?" Logan asked, stopping a few steps from the table. Michael raised his glass as if proposing a toast. "Oh, wonderful that you could join us. Sit down, Logan. This is our little family reunion." Elizabeth realized it was a trap. She shot Michael a furious glare. "What have you planned?" Michael smiled. "I always thought you were smart, Liz, but it seems you underestimated me." Michael pulled out his phone and played a recording of her conversations with Logan. All the plans, schemes, and betrayals were now captured on tape. Logan froze, realizing he had been used as well. "You know, Logan, you were so predictable. You thought you could play both sides, but here you are, and now I have everything I need to destroy you both." Elizabeth's heart raced wildly. She knew Michael now held all the cards. "And what are you going to do?" she asked, trying to remain composed. "Oh, This is just the beginning, darling. I'm going to show the world who you really are. Logan will lose everything he has, and you'll stay with me, but on my terms. Michael sat at the restaurant table, savoring his victory. Logan looked stunned, and Elizabeth remained silent, seemingly accepting her defeat. But inside, she was boiling. "All right, Michael," she said, raising her voice slightly. "You've won. You have the recordings. You control everything. But are you sure no one is keeping secrets about you?" Michael frowned but maintained his composure. "What do you mean, Liz?" Elizabeth pulled a small tablet from her bag and played a video. On the screen were clips of Michael caught in compromising situations, private conversations with influential people hinting at his illegal deals. "You thought I was just sitting and waiting for you to destroy me? I knew you were good at controlling situations, Michael, so I decided to gather a little evidence of my own. Want this to go to the press?" Michael froze. His confidence faltered. He couldn't afford to lose his reputation like this. Michael tried to keep his composure, but his voice trembled. "This is pointless, Liz. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm getting into," she replied. "And now you'll finally understand what it's like to live in fear." Logan stood up, seeming to regain his confidence. "Well, Michael, who's trapped now?" Michael smiled, a cold, menacing smile. "You think you've won? You have no idea what I've prepared for both of you." Michael fell silent. His cold gaze studied Elizabeth and Logan. He played the part well, but inside, he knew he had lost control this time. Logan noticed Michael's hesitation and decided to seize the moment. "Elizabeth, why don't we leave?" Logan said, taking her hand. "We've won. Let's leave him here with his empty threats." Elizabeth was surprised by Logan's confidence, but her intuition screamed that something was wrong. Nevertheless, she stood up, trying to look as confident as he did. When they left the restaurant, Logan started the car and motioned for her to get in. She felt relieved, but her anxiety only grew. "What now?" she asked as Logan pressed on the gas. "We'll start a new life," he said without looking at her. "It's what you always wanted, isn't it?" Elizabeth didn't respond. She stared at his face, which looked far too focused. At one point, she noticed him slide his hand into his jacket pocket and pull something out. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice filled with alarm. Logan pulled out a flash drive and held it up to eye level. "Here's your freedom, Liz. All the information about Michael is on this. But there's one problem. It's my life now, not yours." Elizabeth froze. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "What do you mean?" she whispered, trying to hide her shock. Logan pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to face her. "Did you really think I was helping you out of noble motives? I saw your husband and knew he was weak, and now I hold all the cards. With this flash drive, I can destroy him, but honestly, I'm more interested in the money I'll get from selling this information." Elizabeth felt her world shatter again. She had trusted someone who turned out to be just as ruthless as Michael. "You lied to me," she said, her voice full of anger. "Not exactly. I promised you freedom. I just didn't say it would come for free." Elizabeth realized she had to act quickly. She pretended to comply. "Fine. So what do you want?" Logan smiled. "We'll go to a new place together. You'll stay with me until I get what I need. Then you'll be free." Elizabeth nodded, but a new plan was already forming in her mind. She noticed that Logan had left the car door slightly open and the keys were still in the ignition. When Logan turned away, she grabbed the flash drive and bolted out of the car. Her heart pounded as if it would stop at any moment. She ran along the roadside as Logan realized what had happened. "Liz, stop!" he shouted, running after her. But Elizabeth didn't stop. She knew that if she didn't escape now, she would lose everything. Elizabeth ran as fast as she could. In her hand was the flash drive, the only evidence that could destroy Michael. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her feet hit the wet roadside heavily, and behind her, she could hear Logan closing in. "Liz, stop!" His voice was full of anger, but also desperation. She didn't look back. She knew that if he caught her, he would take the flash drive and never let her escape this trap. Suddenly, a turn appeared ahead of her. In the darkness, she saw the headlights of a car approaching on the road. Without hesitation, she ran onto the highway, waving her arms to stop the vehicle. The car screeched to a halt, stopping just a few meters away from her. A man jumped out of the car, shouting, "Are you out of your mind? Do you want to get yourself killed?" But Elizabeth didn't have time to explain. "Please help me. Someone is chasing me," she cried, clutching the car door while the man looked at her, trying to figure out what was happening. At that moment, Logan appeared from around the corner. "That's my wife," he yelled, pretending everything was under control. "She's just a little confused. Please, don't get involved." The man from the car looked at Logan, then back at Elizabeth. "He's lying. He's trying to steal something important from me." Logan stopped a few meters away, trying to look calm. "Liz, you know I just want to help you. Give me the flash drive, and everything will be fine." The man leaned closer to Elizabeth. "Should I call the police?" "No," she said quickly, fearing that might complicate the situation. "Just get me out of here." The man realized the seriousness of the situation and, without hesitation, motioned for her to get in the car. Elizabeth managed to jump inside, and the car sped off. Logan ran to the road, but it was too late. The headlights disappeared around the bend. "What's going on?" the driver asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Thank you for stopping," she said, trying to catch her breath. "I just need to get to the city. I'll find help there." The man frowned. "Are you sure everything's okay? Who was that guy?" Elizabeth fell silent. She knew she couldn't reveal all the details. "Let's just say I've gotten into a very dangerous situation, and your help is enough." The man nodded, though his eyes remained cautious. As they approached the nearest town, the headlights of a car behind them began flashing as if signaling. It was Logan. "Who's that?" the driver asked, noticing Elizabeth grow pale. "It's him. Please, don't stop." But Logan wasn't giving up. His car accelerated, overtaking them. He suddenly blocked the road, forcing the driver to stop. Logan stepped out of his car, holding something shiny in his hand, a knife. "Give me the flash drive, Liz, or this won't end the way you expect." The man from the car also got out, looking scared but determined. "Listen, buddy, let's not do anything stupid. This is none of your business," Logan barked, but the man didn't back down. At that moment, Elizabeth saw her chance. She grabbed the flash drive, bolted from the car, and ran toward the nearest house with its lights on. She pounded on the door, shouting, Help. Call the police. Logan hesitated, unsure whether to chase her or deal with the driver. He raised the knife, but stopped when the sound of police sirens echoed in the distance. The night had ended, but Elizabeth knew this wasn't over. Elizabeth stood by the door of the house, pounding with all her strength. She could hear Logan arguing with the driver behind her. The police sirens grew louder, but she still didn't feel safe. The door opened. An elderly man stood in the doorway, looking stunned. "What's going on?" he asked. "Call the police, please. I'm in danger," Elizabeth cried. The police began questioning Logan and the driver. But a few minutes later, one of the officers approached her. "Excuse me, Mrs. Roberts, but your husband has already contacted us. He reported that you ran off with his important documents. We'll have to escort you." Elizabeth realized that Michael had used his connections to prepare for this situation. The police considered her escape a violation, and Logan and the driver only reinforced Michael's version of events. She was taken to the police car while Logan and the driver exchanged glances. They knew they still had the compromising material, but their positions were precarious. Elizabeth sat in the back of the police car, feeling her world collapse. She had been detained, while Logan and the driver now freely played on Michael's side. The flash drive with the incriminating evidence she had fought so hard to protect was now in the hands of the police. The officers brought her to the station. She wasn't allowed to make a phone call, and her words were met with cold professionalism. "Your husband has already explained the situation," one officer said. "If you'd like to file a complaint, you'll need to do so through an attorney." Elizabeth lowered her head. She understood that Michael had prepared everything in advance, even here. When she was left in the interrogation room, the door suddenly opened. A man in a suit entered, looking very much like a lawyer. "Ms. Roberts, my name is James Foster. I represent the interests of a party who believes you have valuable information. Do you know what I'm referring to?" Elizabeth frowned. "Are you working for Michael?" "No," he replied calmly, sitting across from her. "I work for one of his clients, the same one who now wants Michael out of the picture. You have something that can make that happen." Elizabeth stayed silent. She knew the risks, but this man seemed to be her only hope. "The flash drive," she finally said. "It's with the police, but I'm not sure if the data is still there." James nodded. "Don't worry about that. The important thing is that we know you're willing to cooperate. If you agree, I can get you out of here, but only on the condition that you help us bring Michael down." Elizabeth hesitated. She understood that every new alliance could lead to even greater problems. But she also knew she had no chance without help. "Fine," she replied, looking James directly in the eye. "I'll do whatever it takes. But only on one condition. I never want to see Michael again." "That can be arranged," James said. "By tomorrow morning, you'll be released on bail. And then, the game begins." Elizabeth walked out of the police station the next morning. James had everything under control. She was released on bail without any unnecessary questions. He was waiting for her outside, standing by a black car. "How are you feeling?" he asked, holding the door open for her. "Like I'm playing someone else's game without knowing the rules," she replied, getting into the car. James smiled. "That's good, because the rules are only made by the winners." During the drive, James explained how Michael had used his influence to cover up his illegal deals. Your husband kept everyone under his control, clients, partners, even some politicians. But he made one mistake. He trusted people who started working against him. And I'm here to make sure he never regains his power." Elizabeth listened, unable to believe how much this man knew. "Why do you think I'll help you?" she asked. "Because you're the only one who can make him slip up. He's used to controlling everything. But you're his weakness. And I can use that." James took her to a small house outside the city. "You'll be safe here. But I warn you, Michael won't give up so easily. If you want to regain control, you'll need to act carefully." On the table, a flash drive was waiting. "This is your weapon," James said. "Everything that was on your flash drive has been restored. We have the evidence to destroy Michael." Elizabeth looked at James. "Why are you helping me? What's in it for you?" James paused. "My gain? I work for people who want to see Michael fall. But I won't lie to you. If you stop being useful, I'll leave you to fend for yourself." James and Elizabeth began their plan. They leaked information about one of Michael's illegal deals to the media. The report became a sensation. A powerful lawyer involved in hidden schemes for his clients. Michael found out about it the next morning. He immediately knew who was behind it. In his office, Michael met with someone who brought him the bad news. "It's her, Michael," his partner said. "Elizabeth and that lawyer, James. They've teamed up." Michael smiled. His cold, calculating mind went to work. This was predictable. She's always overestimated her abilities. But don't worry, I have a plan. Meanwhile, Elizabeth began to suspect James. His actions were too precise, too calculated. She realized this was more than just a war against Michael for him. One evening, she noticed James on the phone, saying, "She's almost ready. One more step, and we can use her for our advantage." Elizabeth felt a chill in her chest. She realized she had become a pawn in his game. Elizabeth sat in her temporary hideout, contemplating how far she had come. She could no longer trust James, but Michael remained her greatest threat. All she had was the flash drive, the incriminating evidence, and her own determination. One night, waking from a restless sleep, she overheard James on the phone. "Michael? No, everything is going according to plan. She doesn't suspect a thing. Once we've gotten everything we need from her, she'll be our key to dismantling your business. Yes, the evidence is ready too. Tomorrow will be the time for the final blow." Elizabeth froze. Her heart clenched with terror. It was unthinkable. James and Michael were working together. All of James' help had been part of a larger scheme, and she was the centerpiece of their game. The next morning, Elizabeth pretended nothing had happened. She approached James, who looked pleased. "What's next?" she asked, trying to hide her tension. "We're going to meet one of my contacts. He'll help ensure your husband is powerless for good," James said. But this time, Elizabeth had her own plan. She knew she couldn't trust anyone. While James was busy with his work, she copied the flash drive and anonymously sent it to several major media outlets. She only included the data that could ruin Michael, but left out anything that might implicate her in the game. When James and Elizabeth arrived at the meeting, it wasn't a contact waiting for them as she expected. It was Michael himself. He looked triumphant. "Liz, did you really think you could outplay me? James did an excellent job convincing you that you had a chance." Elizabeth took a deep breath to hide her anxiety. "Michael, as usual, You overestimate yourself. You think you have everyone under control, but you forgot one thing. Michael smiled, gesturing for her to continue. I acted alone, she said, and now your name is already in the headlines. Your clients? They'll all know what you've done. Your empire ends today. James turned pale. What did you do? Michael opened his phone and saw dozens of notifications. The news had already spread. His illegal deals, manipulations, everything. Now it was all public. Elizabeth looked at both men. You both played your games, but you forgot that I can play too. And now all you have left is mutual betrayal. Michael lunged at James. You set me up. She ruined everything. James yelled back. Elizabeth left the room, leaving them to argue. She knew her game was over. She had no intention of returning to her old life. Elizabeth exited the building, leaving Michael and James alone with their anger and accusations. Her hands were still trembling, but her heart was calm. She had won, but at what cost? Sitting in a taxi, she took a deep breath. A notification appeared on her phone. The news had spread instantly. Michael was the top story in the media, and his reputation was destroyed. James had also lost the trust and support of his partners. But then her phone lit up again. An anonymous message. Your courage is inspiring. If you're ready to start over, reach out to me. I know how to make sure you'll never depend on anyone again. Elizabeth reread the message several times. She wanted to believe it was a sign of new opportunities. But now she knew better than to trust anyone. She closed her phone, looked out the window, and smiled slightly. My game is just beginning, she whispered to herself. What do you think of Elizabeth's story? What would you have done in her place? Could you fight against everyone and come out on top?